project. And we do suggest that if you have children in the home that are younger, that this may be a good time to get away from them and take a few minutes to watch this by yourselves before you show any of this to your children. We're going to be talking about child abuse and trafficking today. So one of the things that this whole session has really opened my eyes to a whole nother world that I did not even know existed until really diving deep into it. And it's something that we just don't really think about too often as far as trafficking goes. Abuse, I think we're all very familiar with abuse. So we're going to talk about what does child abuse and trafficking look like, steps that we can, or signs that we can see, and then steps we can take to help students or adults who are in these situations. We've definitely seen it on social media, we've seen it on the news, and even Netflix has done some really powerful movies on it recently, so it's definitely catching more people's attention and bringing awareness, which is good because that's what we're here to do today, is to bring awareness to problems. Just in 2011, CPS completed 175,421 investigations of suspected child abuse and neglect. That is a lot of cases, and of those, confirmed abuse and neglect was about over 65,000 cases. And so when we're talking, these are Texas children.
That's just Texas.
Yeah. So, Ms. Patrick, why don't you kind of tell us, what does child abuse look like?
Okay, well, child abuse, actually, what it is, okay, child abuse as it is defined by the Federal Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act defines child abuse and neglect as a minimum any recent act or failure to act on the part of a parent or caretaker which results in death, serious physical or emotional harm, sexual abuse or exploitation, or an act of failure to act with presence and imminent risk or of serious harm. Now, child abuse comes in many forms. Some of it is a lot more obvious. Of course, physical abuse is a lot more obvious. And then you have emotional neglect, which is harder to prove and harder to identify, I guess you'd say. And then sexual abuse, and then there's just neglect. Now, sometimes neglect is just, they don't have the resources. Parents don't know. So sometimes neglect is not necessarily as severe as some of the others, and some parents don't know what they don't know. So sometimes reporting these things is helpful to the parent as well, because it provides them resources and counseling. They even provide counseling for parents, and so sometimes it's not, it's not always a bad thing to call.
And I do think with abuse, when we're talking about reporting, it doesn't necessarily mean a criminal investigation is happening. It means that there is an investigator going to the home to see if there are problems. And in that case for neglect, they do a lot of education of the parents. And I have noticed that when we're talking about neglect, it's not because the family can't afford something. Mm-hmm. It's because they truly just don't process or go through the rest of it, whether it's a medical. They don't finish out the process that they should have started. So I think that's a really good, I'm glad that you said that. So we're going to talk about what does child abuse look like. And Ms. Patrick said it perfectly. Some of them are so hard to recognize because there's not physical signs or any type of trauma on the student's face when we see them when we're talking to them. So we're going to talk about, I'm going to break it down into the groups, and then guys, y'all feel free to chime in at any time, especially when we're talking about different levels, because our families here have kids ranging from pre-K all the way through, well, even adults.
Right.
So the first one we're talking about is physical abuse, and that's going to be bruises, cuts, it can be burns. Sometimes you'll see a specific pattern on an arm. This one, some of the signs are a little tricky, like we said, lack of reaction to pain, so that they don't react to any pain at all, and that's a big sign. Aggressive, disruptive, and destructive behavior. passive withdrawal and emotionless behavior, fear of going home or seeing parents, injuries that appear after a child has not been seen for several days, and then unreasonable clothing that may hide arms or legs. And to keep in mind, some of these signs also can show other things, not just abuse. It could also lead to self-harm, which we'll talk about in another episode. So, anything on physical abuse from you guys?
I think that one's more or less pretty straightforward. That's almost the easiest one to identify.
And the only thing is that what I've always heard that, you know, if you spank your child, that's okay. You spank your child, but it's within reason, in a certain area, you know, right above the bottom and right below the bottom, you know. But if we see bruising below that on the legs or on the arms or fingerprints, things like that, those are things for us to be alarmed by, to make a phone call. So sometimes, you know, we have seen that at the elementary level. So, but that's when it's gotten a little out of hand. So.
The one that is kind of harder is neglect. And you have to really have a conversation with a child to really understand if it's true neglect. And again, we've talked about in past of building relationships with our children, with our students, with our families. This is one of those times where it's really important to have that. Some signs of neglect would be obvious malnutrition, lack of personal cleanliness, torn or dirty clothing, stealing or begging for food, child unattended for long periods of time, need for glasses, dental care, or other medical attention, and not because of the lack of financial
resources, right?
Yeah. And then sometimes abandonment, and actually it depends on the age. It gets a little hairy on the abandonment part, but definitely if you're leaving your 5-year-old alone by themselves, that's neglect.
Absolutely.
So, anything on neglect that you guys want to say that you all have had experience with on?
Well, when it comes to neglect, it's like you said, if you don't have a relationship with that child, they're really not going to open up and tell you. And a lot of the times, if you see some of this, sometimes just calling the parent, you get a real feel for what's going on there after talking to the parent or caretaker. Because sometimes they'll say, listen, I don't know what to do. I can't get them there. I don't have the resources. And at that time, we can give you the resources and tell you who to call, where to go for help, and things of that nature. So I always find that trying to develop a relationship with the parent too as well is also good to know whether is this really neglect or are you really just struggling? Because it happens and a lot of people now are struggling. I mean, people have lost their jobs, they've lost their medical, so I mean, we may see what we may deem as that, but it might not be that. So.
And at our level, we do have the clothing pantry to offer free clothes, underwear, socks, jeans, shirts, warm hoodies, warm jackets. So if you're in need of any clothing or if you know a family that is, please get in contact with me. Also, we offer the backpack buddies that come from the Houston Food Bank. Those food bags go home once every week on Friday afternoons, or if you're a remote learner, you can make arrangements with me to come and pick one up. So we do have those resources, and if a teacher lets me know that they think someone is struggling, like Ms. Patrick, I'll give the parent a call and check on what is going on around that whole situation. So, but if you know that you need some help, please reach out to me at the elementary or intermediate school.
The next one is kind of difficult to talk about, and I did warn before we started this episode that we were going to be talking about some uncomfortable and possibly some graphic things, and so the next one is going to be sexual abuse, and the signs of that are going to be physical signs of any STDs, injury to any type of private area on the student, pregnancy in young girls, difficulty in sitting or walking, extreme fear of being alone with adults, and specifically sometimes it's a certain gender that they're afraid of.
Typically the opposite sex.
Yeah. Sexual comments, behaviors, or play, knowledge of sexual relations beyond what is expected for that child's age, Now, I will say we hear a lot of jest in the hallways. So it comes down to what is appropriate for that child and what they're exposed to at home. If they're able to watch whatever they want to watch, they're going to say some things that they're going to say, but it's above the normal.
And they may have they may act in a sexual way by, they may be touching a friend's or tagging a friend in the parts that they shouldn't be tagging them, or they may be touching themselves during class or something like that. So it may manifest itself in that way as well.
Yeah, and the next one is sexualization of, sexual victimization of other children. Placing it on other students or other kids of their age or younger sometimes. So that one's definitely one of the harder ones to talk about. I don't know if y'all have anything else to add on that one. It's pretty self-explanatory though on what we see with that.
And it's hard for the kids to talk about it because it is such a personal thing. Like that's supposed to be such an intimate, personal thing that has kind of been ruined for them. So they don't really know how to talk about it.
Sometimes it's hard for them to open up about it.
Right,
so,
because it is such a private thing that has been, violated.
sometimes
so
it's better to ask the child to sit and draw a picture or maybe write about it, or use, at my age level, elementary level, to use puppets sometimes.
I think more on the high school level we see it being more in a sexual abusive relationship between partners, where one of the partners is a little bit more aggressive. And the other person's not willing. And I think we don't really talk about that very much, but that's definitely something that I've seen in the high school levels.
Absolutely.
The other one that's kind of difficult to identify is emotional. And some of the signs for this one is going to be over compliance, low self-esteem, severe depression, anxiety or aggression, difficulty making friends or doing things with children, lagging in physical, emotional, and intellectual development, caregiver who belittles the child, withholds love, and seems unconcerned about the child's problems. This one's definitely hard because when you're talking to kids, you really have to know who you're talking about and also know a little bit about the family. Is the parents very involved, or what is the situation at home?
Because sometimes emotional abuse doesn't necessarily come from home. It comes from peers. It may come from somebody else that they're around after school, just another adult in the house, or somebody that the parent doesn't really know. And I know that a lot of times when I see kids that are just kind of down and out, but for a couple of days and I've already talked to them, I'll call the parent and they're like, and this is another thing that happens that, and we'll talk about this at another episode as well, but at our age level in junior high, kids that are on medicine for ADHD and all that other stuff, well, their chemical makeup is changing and that medicine is interacting and causing some of those kids to be depressed, and parents don't know that, and I don't know, but doctors maybe aren't bringing that to their attention, and that's what happened with one kid in particular, and they brought him to the doctor and they were like, well, let's try something else, and there was a whole different aura about that kid. He was, his attitude had kind of changed. So, sometimes, again, it's not always abuse, but, but like you said, you need to know the family, you need to know that kid, and I knew that kid to not be like that all the time, so I was like, okay, we need to have a conversation, so.
I think this is a good point to start talking about trafficking.
Yes, so trafficking, there's human trafficking is what it's called, but there's sexual human trafficking and then labor human trafficking. It doesn't necessarily look like you might think. They're not chained to a radiator down in the basement, which I guess we don't have basements in Texas, but it doesn't look like that. They're walking around among us and looking, acting like everything is fine. So there's 3 different ways that, according to the UN, that involves trafficking. Elements of trafficking is the act, the means, and the purpose. So the act, of course, is the recruitment. And where do they find them? A lot of times is on social media, those kids that are vulnerable, that need the attention, like, oh, how many likes did I have? That's a big deal. So they're definitely, that's how they're recruiting. And then, of course, the means, how are they going to get them? Forcing themselves upon somebody to like, hey, come on, you have to do this or else. You know, if you don't come with me, then I'm going to. So it's, again, the vulnerable kids are more susceptible to that. And then, of course, the purpose, like, what are they going to use them for? Are they using them for sexual exploitation? Are they using them for labor? Like, what is the reason? And today we have a Miss Lenora Purvis, and she's a local expert on human trafficking who has worked with many victims and has traveled Texas educating youth and parents about human trafficking. So let's listen to what she has to say.
I'm Lenore Purvis, founder and CEO of Heaven's Army, Home of Amazing Grace, a women's home. I've been working with victims of human trafficking since 2013. I've been rescuing women from the sex industry since 2013, and it's grown a lot. In 2013, there was 27 million victims of human trafficking. Today, there's over 45.8 million victims. In 2013, the industry brought in about $39 billion. Today, it is $150 billion, with sex trafficking bringing over $99 billion. That's more than Nike, Starbucks, Google, and the NFL altogether. The thing is with students, it's happening so much within our schools. It's become the recruiting grounds. The schools, the malls, detention centers, shelters, children involved in foster care, because the recruiters are looking for vulnerable. They are preying upon you. And so it's good to educate yourself. Be aware of the red flags and things that's going on. I talk to a lot of students, and I always just tell them that if you see one of your friends that things are radically changing, you know, maybe their clothes have changed, their attitude has changed, where once they were once shy, now they've become more open and things. Be aware of those things. Be a friend and see if something's going on. Sometimes that if they didn't have money before, and then now they're wearing name brand clothes and wearing lots of makeup or having name brand purses and bags. Those are red flags to look for within our school systems, that things have changed. The traffickers are increasingly using technology to trap our children. The statistics say that 93% of 12 to 17-year-olds have cell phones, and they go online. About 63% of them go online almost every day. 75% of them possess and own their own cell phone, and 64% who own phones report texting in class and receiving messages. 25% report making and receiving calls while in school and in classes. 54% of teens have received unwanted text, spam, and even nude pictures. 26% have been bullied and harassed, and 15% of these students report having received sexually suggestive text messages. 30% of calls received by the National Human Trafficking Hotline originate in Texas. And 25% of those calls were located in Texas. The National Human Trafficking Hotline receives more calls from the Texas than any other state. And I always just say, you know what, Texas, we have a problem. People need to be more alert and aware. We need to educate ourselves of what's going on. It is a growing industry. It is surpassing gun trafficking and drug trafficking. They say that it'll be a higher industry within the next few years. And it's because it's the hardest to detect. If I had a child in the back of my car and got pulled over, and the cops came up next to me, and they would not question that I had a child in the back of my car, even though I was probably going to sell that child. If I had drugs in the back of my car and guns, I would probably go to jail. That's why it's the hardest to detect. We need to be aware that a lot of times it's not what we see on the surface, but look below the surface, because human trafficking is growing, and we all need to be a part of the plan to stop and combat against human trafficking. It is in our community. It is in our schools. It is in our small towns. It's our rural areas. Traffickers know to go where it's the most vulnerable, where it's the least detected. There's so many out looking in the Houston area and in your bigger cities, everyone knows it's there. But in our smaller towns like Cold Spring and Shepherd and Cleveland and things, no one thinks that it's going to be there in their little small towns. However, I can tell you different things. I have women in my home, a lot of women that have come through from these communities, that have gone through these situations. And a lot of times they don't even realize they're victims. I've worked with a victim at one point that was 16 years old, and her family was very poor, and mom was doing everything that she could to take care of her children. And so mom was okay with her daughter dating a 60-year-old man. 60-year-old man was paying all of mom's bills. However, when I heard this story, when they came to my resource center and the daughter was telling me that she was dating this man, I quickly seen the red flags and had to talk to mom that she was a trafficker, because the definition of trafficking is anything exchanged of value. And so mom was allowing her daughter to date this man. However, this man was paying all of mom's bills. Mom was the trafficker. I've also been involved when there was a raid in a school, a very big school, a local school, and there was over 100 girls involved in a human trafficking ring. It's the new gang. It's the cool thing to do. They don't see the harm in it. It's just sex. However, I get name brand clothes and purses, and I get fame and fortune, it seems like. However, I work with the women that have been devastated. This trauma that has hit their life and is life-changing forever. At the time, it may seem that it's so simple. However, years down the road, or even a year down the road, or months down the road, the trauma hits of what just have taken place. And so I educate and bring awareness to human trafficking. I go and educate in schools and talk to students about the reality of what human trafficking is. It is not fun. It is not glamorous. A lot of our society grooms these victims. I've talked to a trafficker at one point, and he said, we don't have to groom them that often. He says, because society already grooms them. We think that everything is glamorous and having nice things and stuff. And so whenever they offer this to someone that doesn't have much, guess what? They've got them trapped because they desire those things that society says we should have. And they lose their self-identity, they lose who they are, and they lose their purpose and their destiny, that no education, nothing can get back, because they have to find themselves again. And so I just say that educate yourself. Parents, educate yourself. Students, be awake, be alert, look around, and be a true friend to those around you.
All right, well, thank you, Ms. Purvis. That's amazing, the information that you provided for us. Thank you for sharing. And I'm just astounded at the statistics and that it's a billion-dollar business. Like, I can't imagine that's...
And that's so close to home.
And that it happens right in front of us.
I know, I could not believe.
Through the schools.
It kind of takes your breath away to know, like, it's happening within our schools, in our community here in Cold Spring and surrounding areas. It's just really kind of, it is scary. It is definitely scary.
Absolutely.
Well, if you suspect a child is being harmed or abused in any way, some of the signs that you can look for is that they withdraw from physical touch, or their thumb sucking or regressing, maybe pottying in their pants again, or maybe they're refusing to take a bath or bathing excessively. Maybe they have some sleep disturbance. You might see some bruising or cuts or scratches on them. And then also some verbal cues. They may be talking more, have more adult language, using more adult terms, things like that. So what you can do is talk to your child. Remember to pick your time and your place carefully. Be aware of how you approach them, your tone, your demeanor, your body language. Talk to them directly, and listen to them. Be fully there and listen to them as they're talking with you. And then follow up with a plan and reassure them that everything's going to be okay. Then also, if if it's that severe, you need to report it to CPS, which is 1-800-252-5400. And so there's also places that you can go for help, such as the Safe House, which is located in Huntsville. There's one in Livingston and in Trinity that deals with sexual abuse or physical abuse, violence against children. And that number is 936-291-3369. So, and then again, we have the Burke Center in Livingston, which is 936-634-5010.
And we also want to say if a child is in immediate danger,
Yes.
just call 911.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
We definitely don't want to be sending a child into another situation where it could be unfortunate what the end result is. So.
I think remembering too that if you file a CPS report, you can do it anonymously.
Yes.
And you're not saying that it is a fact, you're saying, please come and look. And you're trying to make that child safe and maybe possibly get help for the family. So you're not accusing anyone of harm. You just want it to be checked out.
And the rule of thumb is about 48 hours.
Absolutely.
Reporting
Yes.
within 48 hours because you want to make sure that child is getting the most immediate attention as possible. Ms. Below, you shared some great resources about Safe House. Some other ones for human trafficking would be hopeforjustice.org, humantraffickinghotline.org. There's also the polarisproject.org if you're wanting to know more information about the statistics, what you can do to help people in your area. And then always a great place to go for child abuse or trafficking is the Texas Department of Family Protective Services. They have a lot of great resources. That's where you can report anonymously online as well. So if you want to do that, that's a great place. And so is there anything else we would like to add before we...
All right, well, thank you for joining us again for Chat with the Counselor. Stay tuned, there's more to come. Thank you.